A potential new protein has been found inside a meteorite that crashed 30 years ago. Dr. Brad Tucker is here as we dive into this Talkin' Science Story of the Week.
Across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube, this is Talking Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
And let's dive into the stories of the week with a potential new protein that's never been seen before on Earth, seemingly discovered or has been discovered in a meteorite.
Yeah, so when we say protein, we're obviously talking about kind of at the genetic level, not, a piece of steak. we're talking about things that go into the formation of cellular structures and the things we're made up of. And there's classes of protein, and they're made different ways, and they have different structures. And a meteorite that was found in 1990, they've been studying it, and a new technique that's been studied on this meteorite hinted at one of the proteins in this meteorite was very different from the rest, and in fact, the composition was one that is not found here on Earth, which obviously got people's interest.
And that meteorite is ASFA 086. It did land in Algeria.
That's right. Yeah, about 30 years ago. And it wasn't just, sitting on someone's counter and then they changed it. Once it was discovered, it was preserved, and people take samples out occasionally and study them. We talked about the Murchison meteorite a few months ago, and they studied one of these samples to find it was over 7 billion years old. Because, techniques are improved, so they want to not contaminate things. Now, obviously, we've talked a bit about some of these other things. We had ribose in RNA was found on another meteorite. We've seen signs of some of the other amino acids on different meteorites and Comet 67P with Rosetta's probe. It's one of these things where, I think the jury's out about what it exactly means. But it's another kind of clue and hint that there is strong evidence, potentially, that the ingredients for life exist beyond Earth.
It's always been surmised that life didn't necessarily start here on Earth, that it did come from an asteroid or a meteorite or a comet that has landed on Earth, and this is sort of lending itself to that theory.
That's exactly right. One of the big questions is how did life start? Was it a random spark? Was it a random set of circumstances? Was it a random thing that crashed from Mars, from a comet, from an asteroid? And so when we talk about trying to find ingredients for life, it's not just to find aliens. It's just to see, are the ingredients out there? Is it unique to Earth? Is the recipe unique to Earth? If you want to think about it that way, right? It's like baking. You could put the same amount of ingredients in, and it turns not into a cake, but into a hard lump. That's my baking. So, edible versus a weapon is, a difference of a cup of flour sometimes. That's the same question here. Is it the ratios? Is it the ingredients? Is it some combination? And are those other places? And are they in a sufficient quantity, we think, to get there? So whether this turns out to be unique or just something we haven't seen before on Earth, it's just another sign that at least some of these things are living and surviving on space objects.
One thing they found with this meteorite is that some of its composition is very consistent with long period comets, orbiting around the heliosphere.
Yeah, that's right. When Rosetta landed on Comet 67P 5 years ago now almost, it did find some ingredients, and it found it wasn't that different from as what we thought asteroids. And when we're looking at the data from Hayabusa when it comes down in December, when we look at measurements from even interstellar comets like Borisov that we talked about, all these things hint that there's various ingredients that are out there, and we know simple things. We know these things hit the Earth. We know comets hit the Earth, or at least the inner planets. They've hit Jupiter in human time in 1994. And so if they carry the ingredients, maybe it's not that outside the question that it happened. And then you have to think, well, if it happened on Earth, did it happen on Mars? Did it happen on Venus? And if it did or didn't, why?
Now, similar techniques could be used on other meteorites. Is this a different process that they've used for ace for 086 compared to how they've studied other meteorites?
That's right. So I think what they're currently doing is looking at some of the other interesting meteorites that apply this new technique. Just as the technique for determining that Murchison was 7 billion years old, you can use it. As machines are updated and as our knowledge is updated, you want to revisit the measurements. And so you imagine this won't be the only one. And this is why people want to find meteorites early, because the big question is always contamination. If you find it early, less chance of contamination. There's projects, as we talked about fireballs in the sky, which is trying to track meteorites as it comes into Australia and figure out where it came from. If you can figure out the meteorite when it landed, get to it quickly, and where it came from in space, you can kind of figure out the whole process, and that's the name of the game right now.